In this presentation, as we follow fashion from the 1930s to the 1940s, we're going to examine the way that events outside of fashion truly shape what fashion looks like. And there's a couple of bookending events that will happen in this period. As we talked about, perhaps you don't remember, as it was a while ago, but as we talked about the end of 2 weeks ago before vacation, we were in the glories of the Jazz Age, where girls were dressing up and going out in cars and drinking bootleg gin and wearing a very short skirt, a very boyish silhouette, and doing basically whatever they wanted to. What happened in October 20th, 1929, on Tuesday, I forget the date exactly, but Black Tuesday, the stock market crashed. And with it, the rest of the economy, both in America and in the world. Farms suffered, banks closed. There's a lot of speculation as to what caused it. Certainly, there's some speculation as to what prolonged it. But what it was is the Great Depression. And within a year of this beginning, you will see a distinct change in the way women are dressing. What happened during the Great Depression is, as the economy crashed, there was massive unemployment. I'm talking to the tune of 25% of the population being unable to work. People were starving. People were going through garbage cans. The banks had collapsed. Farms were suffering. And people were worried. And what you tend to see when people get worried is a return to more traditional roles and looks, particularly for women. And if you look at the 1930s, what you see is that suddenly women's dresses are longer. The waist, that dropped waist that was very boyish, has returned to its natural place. And that the overall look is very sweet, feminine, sophisticated. Don't hurt me. I am a gentle and ladylike creature. And, one has to wonder where that comes from. One has to wonder if it's not a reaction to the excesses of the 20s that disturbed people so greatly that they retreated to a more conservative look. But whatever, the long and the short of it is that eventually the Wall Street crash forced the wild girl of the 20s to grow up, become a lady, and take life more seriously. Now, the silhouette had been slim before, but look how long it is now. Very long, very slim, very narrow. A number of undergarments were created to keep that long, slim, narrow shape. And it was, which was actually helped along by the rubber industry. So a couple of things we want to look at in the 1930s. First of all, hats. Hats were everywhere. And you had the cloche hat, the close-knit cloche hat in the 1920s. But these hats became a little bit more fancy, a little bigger, sometimes tipped forward on the head. But hats were ubiquitous, and by that I mean they were everywhere. A lady wasn't considered a lady if she didn't have her hat and her gloves when she went out. Now, if we look at the ladies here in this bar, well, they're drinking legally because in the 1930s, Prohibition ended and you could go to a bar. But you'll see some of these ladies don't have gloves on. They're smoking cigarettes. They're still hanging a bit loose. So with this silhouette and with this crash, life changed for a lot of people at two ends of the spectrum. The wealthy continued to be wealthy. The wealthy, in fact, became more wealthy because as the dollar valued what they had was worth more. The poor became much, much poorer. I don't think what we've ever seen or will see in our country as great and schizophrenic a divide between the fashion of real people and the fashion of people's dreams as in the 1930s. So as many, many people were struggling to just keep body and soul together, just to feed their families, or perhaps not even that, We were also shown this the glamorous vision of Hollywood. And it was a Hollywood that was fantasy excess. The Kardashians times 100. So what we see at the left of your screen here are some simple day dresses for women. And women in general for lower class women, not women in Hollywood, women would wear a below the knee dress with a belt, a slim belt at the waist, of course the little hat. Hair was short and done in a permanent wave. You would go to the salon once a week and get your wave done. Notice the T-strap shoes. The Mary Janes were very popular at the time. These dresses would be made primarily out of cotton or rayon, which was a newly developed fabric created from wood pulp, one of our first synthetic fabrics. Now, Hollywood, on the other hand, was showing us this vision, this fantasy vision of shimmering gowns. The one fabric that you can always associate with the 1930s is silk charmeuse, and you see it on this blonde on your screen, Jean Harlow. You can see that she is wearing this shiny, silky, drapey fabric, which is called silk charmeuse. Also, the dresses are bias cut, which means that they're cut on the diagonal grain as opposed to on the straight grain. This enables you to make a dress that clings to the curves without being super tight and without having to do any kind of darting to draw the dress in. These dresses, understand that people were going to see movies for escapism, so they didn't mind that they were this elegant and this far removed from their normal life. These long, slender gowns echoed Greek statuary. They were elegant, they were classical, they were usually of a pale and pastel color. You see frequently chiffons and see-through fabrics worn over a satin. And the queen of this was Madame Vionnet. Vionnet's name is synonymous with the bias cut dress. And you can see in the center, that gold dress, how beautifully she employs the cutting. I'm not sure if you can see the seams. If you look carefully, you can. How she cuts her dress on the bias in order to make it fit the body in a way that is sinuous and elegant, like a second draping skin, which gives you that 1930s glamour silhouette. The 1930s into the 40s is also quite famous for sportswear. In fact, you could say that this is when true sportswear was invented. Coco Chanel, of course, was a forerunner in France in the 20s. But for the first time, American designers designing clothes that a woman could move in, could do activities in, could do sports in, brought American sportswear to the forefront of fashion. Claire McCardell, Bonnie Cashin, these are famous names that have left their mark and made, actually still to this day, the New York shows are considered the sportswear shows of the world. Even men relaxed a little bit. The +4 suit was a suit that was a loose jacket, unfitted, and involved a pair of little knickerbockers, which are these pants that tuck into your sock. You can see in this picture of a bunch of men in their more casual outfits that the silhouette for a man's suit at the time became much more relaxed. The jacket is not tight-fitted, looks almost like a little hunting jacket or safari jacket. And the pants are either the breeches that are tucked into knickerbockers, they were called, that are tucked into your socks, or breeches for shooting. Even men's suits, as you can see by the man in the pinstripe suit on the right, even men's suits were not tight-fitting, as we can see them in other periods. The pant was a very loose, baggy pant, usually wool, and made baggy with the addition of pleating at the top. Very smart time for men's suits, and quite comfortable. Elsa Schiaparelli. I must take a moment to talk about this fabulous and not a well-known designer among design circles, but her name is not household name. Elsa Schiaparelli was an Italian designer who was an artist, who was very creative and whimsical, was friends with all of the famous surrealists at the time. Salvador Dali, you may have heard of, Picasso, and her dresses, coats, hats, she made a hat in the shape of a shoe. These are all beautiful examples of her sense of whimsy and her love of the surreal. We see the jacket in the center with the woman's silhouette here and her hair and sequins down the arm. The very, very famous was actually bought by someone who married the king, who would have been the King of England. We'll talk about that in class. The famous lobster ball gown, which had a hand-painted lobster on it. Elsa Schiaparelli, design genius. And if you were wondering who the Elsa was among our dress forms, that's the one. The 1930s, the mystery of the 1930s is something we'll go into more in class and certainly in the movies that we watch. And honestly, I don't wish to make light of it because nothing could prepare the country for the kind of devastation that this economic loss wreaked upon families and people throughout the country. In fact, although Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President FDR, is credited with beginning a recovery from the Great Depression, it was, unfortunately, as is often the case, actually a war that got us out of it. The hostilities that began in Europe during the late 30s and early 40s eventually reached our shores with Japan's bombing of Pearl Harbor, and they, in the hopes that it would make America want to stay out of the war. Obviously, they hadn't given a lot of thought to American nature, because what in fact happened, as you know, is that Americans entered World War II, which would have a striking effect on fashion. As you can see, so one of the things that you notice about World War II fashion, or fashion in the 40s, is a very strong military influence. We're talking brass buttons, we're talking shoulder pads, we're talking ties, we're talking a very a nipped-in waist, we're talking a almost uniform look, patriotic inspiration. We, the values of the time meant that we all were rooting for our country. Wartime rationing was not just relegated to food, but also to cloth and clothing, meant that skirts were shorter. Skirts, those long, narrow, bias-cut skirts that you saw in the 30s, they take a lot of fabric. I don't know if you've tried making anything in a bias cut, but you will find that it takes far more fabric than to cut on the straight grain. So those bias cut skirts and dresses disappeared. And what we see in their stead are short, boxy skirts with practical shoes and a little military-inspired jacket. Still worn with the hat. The hat has gotten a little less close to the head, a little bigger, tilted jauntily forward, and we still see that our ladies will always wear gloves, because if you don't wear gloves when you're out, you're not really a lady. The one thing that actually was a little bit, was a consolation, women couldn't wear those long bias cut dresses anymore, and fabric was rationed, and you probably didn't have more than a couple dresses to your name. But you know what you could do? You could finally wear the pants. And not just because women were taking on wartime roles in factories, which was partially the case, but pants became very fashionable for women. Certainly a number of Hollywood actresses adopted the androgynous look of a trouser and made it very chic. Now, I want you to notice that when you look at these trousers, they are full, they are pleated, they're loose and slouchy, but with a very high waist. And if you look at the one on the far right, or left, right, I believe to you, is it has a paper bag waist with a little thin belt. So this pant was not, didn't look like jeans, slouchy, high-waisted, elegant, and a very chic menswear look. But here you go, here we have some women ready for the factory. Women also were going into factories for the first time because men were at war and it was necessary. And frankly, a lot of women found great satisfaction in this role. It's a problem that when war ends, their freedom to pursue their own career ends with it. But until then, we have women in coveralls, women in trousers, women in pants, women who actually are comfortable. The beauty look of let me see if I can move this out of the way. No, I can't. The beauty look of the period from the 30s to the 40s was very pronounced and very different from the 20s. You see that it is a high arched eyebrow, like the eyebrow was actually shaved, drawn on in a higher arch with eyeshadow put where your normal eyebrow would have been, lush false eyelashes, and a very defined glossy lip with the introduction of a lip pencil for the first time. Now the lady that you see on your left is from the 1930s, and you can tell by her short, permed haircut. She would have gone to the salon once a week to get her hair rolled, permed, and slept on it very carefully, and then fluffed it up during the day and only wash it once a week, if that. And we have the women over here in the 40s. Haircuts became a bit of a luxury as women didn't have enough money to be spending on their beauty routines. As women's hair grew out, the fashionable thing to do was to roll it into these long rolling curves around the face and the back of the neck. A more natural look for girls emerges in some of the videos that we're going to see. And you can see in that the beginning of the rise of the teenager in the 1950s. I'm going to make this recording for people who can't come to, actually making this, let's go back to the beginning of our slides. I'm making this slide presentation for people who can't attend for any reason the Zoom meetings for class. Most of this is stuff that I'm going to go over then, but it might be a little bit helpful for you to hear what I have to say about various images in the slide presentation. It's really important for you all to, whether you can attend the Zoom class or you're listening to this abbreviated lecture, to go through everything in the module and watch each of the movies. Each of the movies are very short. They're all under 10 minutes long. And in order to get a real picture of the era, in order for you to be able to answer the questions on the test, it's going to be important for you to watch all of those. So thanks for watching, and I hope this works out, because this is the first time I've ever done something like this.